Hello, dear colleagues. Today I plan to discuss very briefly the approach to management of type 2 diabetes, especially after metformin has been exhibited. This will be followed by two very interesting cases which illustrate some complications of diabetes. So the first slide here shows the case history of a patient YK, 45-year-old male, who was just diagnosed to have type 2 diabetes just 3 months ago. Blood pressure normal, BMI 24 kilogram per meter square, that is just touching the border of obesity, and of course lipids were normal, A1C was 9.1. This patient was given metformin, slow release 500 milligram in the morning and 1000 milligram in the evening, which is considered a usual dose in our country for type 2 diabetics, along with of course the lifestyle measures which are important in all type 2 or even type 1 diabetics. So they were given. However, after 3 months of treatment, a follow-up showed an A1C of 8.2%. That means the drug was not adequate. History was taken and lifestyle measures were fully implemented. Patient had already lost about 2 kilo of weight. It means he was moving in the right direction as far as lifestyle measures are concerned. So a very important pertinent question is that if your patient fails on metformin, what is the next drug you should choose? And there is a combination of many old and new drugs. Our choices have expanded now considerably. For example, on this slide, you will see that the treatment algorithms where metformin appears on the top, and with failure of metformin, next there are 6 options. And I'll briefly discuss these options for you because this is a very frequent question when you are treating type 2 diabetes. And there you have the old classic sulfonylurea. You have the glitazone, thiazolidinediones, that is pioglitazone. You have DPP-4 inhibitors. You have SGLT2 inhibitors. You have GLP-1 receptor agonist and basal insulin. So how do you choose between them, old and new? I must tell you, my approach is to use as far as possible medications which do not cause much hypoglycemia. And considering that, I would prefer, of course, here to use any other drug except sulfonylurea and basal insulin. Overall, basal insulin produces less hypoglycemia than the prandial insulin. However, given sufficient dose, it can produce hypoglycemia. So therefore, my approach would be to first use the 4 other options, except so out of the 6, except sulfonylurea and basal insulin, I would like to consider the other 4 in this patient. Now, which should be the 4 here? Now, here the person is slightly overweight, and therefore I may rule out the pioglitazone. Then GLP-1 RA is an injectable therapy. It is ideal for people with gross obesity, like if the BMI was like 30. I would have considered that as a drug of choice here, and also because of the fact that GLP-1 RAs have been shown to prevent, even to some extent, the vascular complications of diabetes. So I would have seriously considered that. However, because of the inconvenience, cost involved, and as obesity here is not marked, I have to now choose between DPP-4 inhibitor and SGLT2 inhibitor. And between these two, of course, is a very narrow margin. They are very competitive in that sense, and frankly, it can be any one of them. SGLT2, probably if patient, also it will also assist in weight loss, and now we also know that SGLT2 like empagliflozin and to some extent canagliflozin and maybe data about DAPA are pending, but they have shown vascular benefits. However, if you want to give a drug which will not produce any side effects, the side effect profile is very, very benign, then it is DPP-4 inhibitors. So this is how you narrow down your choices of drug. And frankly, the newer drugs which do not produce hypoglycemia are preferred. When the weight problem is severe, then GLP-1. If weight problem is moderate, then SGLT2 inhibitor. And of course, lean people and where the weight problem is not much, then probably pioglitazone. Sulfonylurea and basal insulin, to my mind, will be considered next after the other 4 options have been tried. So this is very basic approach we discuss all the time. You see algorithm here developed by ADA, similar one by EASD, similar one by RSSDI. There is a very typical RSSDI chakra, quite complicated. But if you go by your simple logic, one, use non-hypoglycemic drug. That means use drugs which do not produce hypoglycemia. And secondly, of course, if the weight problem is there, then you prefer some drug versus other. And last of all, if there are vascular problem already there or anticipated or their risk factors are severe, then do consider seriously GLP-1RA and SGLT2 inhibitors, because these 2 classes of drugs have shown vascular protection. So the next slide, now we will take a very interesting case for you, and this is case report of type 2 diabetic patient with kidney disease. Kidney disease is a very complex issue in type 2 diabetic. And although the diabetic nephropathy, the classic complication of diabetes, but the same person may sometimes have had admixture of a different types of kidney disease. The most important thing which I want to emphasize for we clinicians is to realize that there are some treatable factors which should never be lost sight of. For example, if the person has an infection, it is eminently treatable. And if the patient has an obstruction, it is eminently treatable. And this is where you can really make the difference in the prognosis of patient. So on the next slide, we have the history of this patient, 58-year-old female, known case of type 2 diabetes for 18 years. So long-standing diabetes. Hypertension for 8 years, hypothyroidism for 6 years, was admitted at Just Look Hospital with abdominal pain, fever, loose motions and decreased urine output for the previous 3 days. She had burning micturition for last about 5 days. The abdominal pain was colic in nature and localized to the left hypochondriac region. I must tell you the left hypochondriac region really is also the anterior renal angle, because many doctors forget that besides posterior renal angle, there is anterior renal angle, where the pain because of kidney pathologies is felt. Patient had a very poor glycemic control, and obviously this patient had diabetic neuropathy and vasculopathy, especially of lower limbs, and very unfortunate this patient had bilateral below knee amputation, which is a terrible thing to happen, but it is a reflection of the fact that either there was a very bad vascular disease, or frankly this patient was one of those careless ones who paid very scant attention to the foot care, and this is how she landed up with bilateral lower limb amputation below knee. Patient also had diabetic retinopathy, for which the laser photocoagulation was done. So this story tells us that 18 years of diabetes, and of course you see with the diabetic retinopathy, which is already under treatment, it indicates that this patient is very likely to have a bad diabetic nephropathy. So it is almost assumed that this patient will have nephropathy. But presently this patient had come with burning micturition and a colicky pain which was felt in the anterior renal angle, and of course she had fever and she appeared to be in sepsis. So next slide shows the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes with retinopathy, neuropathy, peripheral vascular disease, and presently you see a nephropathy with probably urinary tract infection was made. Patient was of course given IV fluids, analgesics and insulin therapy, and a urine culture was sent, and patient was started on cefaperazone sulbactam as the first antibiotic after this sample for culture was collected. As the renal functions are borderline, which I'll show you later on, this patient was put on repaglinide 3 times a day, and Tradjenta, that is the linagliptin, and of course insulin 3 times a day, glucosylcerin insulin 3 doses in a day, which was appropriate for borderline renal function. Next slide shows the investigations. The WBC count was raised. The creatinine was 1.6 and calculated on the basis of body weight, or eGFR was 70 ml per minute, which is just at the lower limit, at the limit of normality. The sodium was low, but potassium was high, 5.3 milligrams. Uric acid was high, 8.7. Blood sugar very high. Serum albumin markedly reduced, 3.3, showing that she probably was leaking protein from the kidney. She was further evaluated for abdominal pain with an ultrasound which showed left side hydronephrosis with dilated proximal ureter, urinary bladder debris, and gallbladder calculi and fatty changes in the liver. So she had multiple findings, the most important being left hydronephrosis. A CT scan of abdomen and pelvis was done, which showed left rhinomegaly with marked surrounding fat stranding and facial thickening suggestive of pyelonephritis. A PET CT was done which showed poorly functioning left kidney. Urine culture was done which grew Klebsiella pneumoniae. And of course, they were found resistant to cefoperazone, but they were sensitive to amikacin, which was the drug given later on. This is a schematic presentation of ultrasound, and which really showed some obstruction at the level of the upper 1/3 of the ureter on the left side. So there was a dilatation of the ureter and pelvic calyceal system above that, and most interesting thing, there was some floating objects seen. You see, with little different sonolucency, and those 4 objects were almost floating in the kidney. Clinically, patient was febrile, toxic, and had severely tender left kidney. We diagnosed a patient of left obstructed kidney with pyelonephrosis, and she was referred to a neurologist. Next slide shows further progress. A general condition of patient was poor left ureterorhinoscopy was done under local anesthesia using a 6F Wolf ureterorhinoscope. Findings included thick purulent urine in the bladder, which was washed out, purulent efflux from left ureteric office, large impacted papilla was found in the upper third of the ureter, which are removed with forceps. A gush of thick purulent urine drained from the pelvic calyceal system, and a DJ stent was then put in place. Patient's general condition improved dramatically. However, significant pyuria persisted despite use of appropriate and adequate antibiotics. As left nephrectomy was being considered, a isotopic renal scan was done, which shows the split kidney function as the 20% function of the left kidney. So it was decided to conserve the left kidney instead of doing a nephrectomy. A repeat ureterorhinoscopy was done, this time with under spinal anesthesia, which revealed thick pus in the left kidney, and also 4 papillae were seen lying loose in the renal pelvis, and same were flushed out from the renal pelvis. She was given appropriate antibiotics, mainly amikacin. She started improving gradually with sharp reduction in intensity of abdominal pain, increase in the urine output to the normal levels. Her UTI was also improving gradually. Her routine blood investigation was repeated, which showed a creatinine of 1.3 milligram per dl. Electrolyte studies showed constantly raised potassium level of 5.2 to 6.4 milliequivalent. So a continuously raised potassium level. In next slide, in view of her above clinical picture, we made a diagnosis of hyporenemic hypoaldosteronism. This is a very interesting side diagnosis we made, and we will discuss that a little bit. You see, she was investigated for this diagnosis, that is renin and aldosterone levels were done to rule out this hyporenemic hypoaldosteronism, and the renin activities were low normal, 0.46 nanogram per ml per hour, and again the aldosterone level was also low normal, 69.2, the normal, low normal, the lower limit being 50 to, of course the range is 50 to 194 of nanogram. So these levels confirm the diagnosis of hyporeninemic hypoaldosteronism. As the potassium continued to stay high, and although renal failure was only marginal, and in fact creatinine had come down, you see she was given fludrocortisone 0.1 milligram once a day, and her potassium level slowly normalized in about a month's time, after which the fludrocortisone was discontinued. So, to summarize, this was a very interesting patient, a type 2 diabetic with multiple long-term vascular complications of nephropathy, neuropathy, retinopathy, maybe peripheral vascular disease earlier, which had led to amputations, and now she presented with bad urinary tract infection. In fact, my resident called me as she was admitted that she's got, the urinary tract infection, but there is severe pain in the left hypochondrium, and in fact I told on phone that this looks like this patient has papillary necrosis, and that's why this severe pain has occurred. And of course, the resident told me that the plain X-ray of abdomen has not shown any calculus. So in the absence of calculus, somebody with UTI, a diabetic, has urinary tract infection and has a renal colic, think of a sloughed papilla which is stuck in the ureter. So this is a very interesting, a rare occurrence, but very important thing to diagnose. See, of course, with full treatment, she was discharged after a total hospital stay of about 2 weeks. She remained asymptomatic regarding her UTI, and serum potassium was 4.1 at 3-month follow-up visit. The second diagnosis which we have considered here is a very interesting one, that is hyporeninemic hypoaldosteronism. This is very interesting diagnosis. It is seen very frequently in diabetics. You see, it's not uncommon at all. And even with borderline renal failure, the potassium continues to stay very high in these people. It can occur in non-diabetics as well, but the majority of cases of this are seen in diabetics, and if unexplained hyperkalemia is seen in a diabetic, one should seriously consider this as a possibility. And diagnosis and of course the management is very different. Of course, besides the oral potassium intake, which one would reduce and control, of course, diabetes well, which also can sometimes lower potassium to some extent, but most importantly, you may have to exhibit this fludrocortisone in order to bring down the potassium. So this was another very interesting side diagnosis in this patient. Next slide, we take up another case of type 2 diabetes with peripheral neuropathy, a very interesting case, you see. And next slide shows the story of this patient, 40-year-old female hailing from Maharashtra. She developed weakness of both lower limbs and difficulty in getting up from sitting position. This was of acute onset, and this was developed only for the past about 3 or 4 days. She was unable to walk without support. She suffered from type 2 diabetes for the past 2 years. Currently, she was being treated by lifestyle modification and glimepiride 1 milligram OD. Her metabolic control has been poor all along. She was first seen on 25th July last year. On 20th of July, after she had noticed the weakness after walking for 15 minutes following dinner, and on entering the house she felt weakness in the left lower limb. She entered the house with support of her elder son. This was not associated with any pain. She was able to do all routine activities with slight weakness of left lower limb for the next 3 days. On 24th morning, while getting up from the bed, she felt weakness on the right lower limb and also the left upper limb. So you have paralysis of both lower limb and to some extent the left upper limb, and she had now difficulty in getting up from sitting position. She could stand with someone's husband's support, and she was still doing some routine activities like some cooking in the kitchen. There is no history of tingling, numbness or burning pain in the lower limbs. There is no history of any bladder symptoms. She felt some bowel disturbance, mild diarrhea, passing stool twice a day or for a couple of days just before admission, which was in 2014. This patient was seen by us in 2014. Next slide shows further features of this patient. On admission, she was found to have moderately severe limb girdle weakness. At around 6 p.m. on the same day, she started having difficulty in speech and difficulty in spitting out water. So it looks like there was some palatopharyngeal weakness. There is no history of diplopia, visual disturbances, dysphagia or dyspnea, no history of fever, lower respiratory tract infection or any recent vaccination. There are no major illnesses in the past. Family history, father hypertension, you see, and she had given birth to the second child about 14 years ago. You see, so on examination, conscious, well-oriented, speech normal, pupils normal, central, reacting to light and accommodation. No facial or palatal weakness was noticed. In the limbs, tone was normal. Power in both limb girdles was grade 3 by 5. The right limb grade was about 5 by 5. Left upper limb was somewhat weak, grade 4 by 5. The sensations were normal, superficial as well as vibratory sensations were normal. D-tender reflexes were coming through, but plantars were flexor. So what kind of diagnosis you consider here? This is very, very important. This was a generalized neuropathy starting from both legs, now going into one upper limb, and probably as the patient was observed for a few days, she developed probably mild palatopharyngeal weakness. Fortunately, no respiratory difficulty. So what would you consider out of these varied diagnoses? Of course, there are many possibilities, you see, and we have to see whether this neuropathy is related to diabetes or unrelated. This is a very important consideration. So it could be what would consider probably acute neuropathy of hyperglycemia, which is extremely rare though, mind you, because most of the time the diabetic neuropathy is a chronic sensory motor symmetrical peripheral neuropathy, mostly seen in the feet and legs. Acute neuropathy like this is very rare sometimes with severe hyperglycemic crisis, and it can resemble the features we saw here in our patient. Interestingly, this is one type of diabetic neuropathy which is almost totally reversible on adequate treatment. So this is a very, very rare occurrence. Was it acute myelopathy? It may be possible. In that case, it will be probably lesion will be in cervical cord. However, you see the plantar's big flexor goes against this particular possibility. It could be porphyria, which can give rise to acute neuropathy, generalized neuropathy like this, and hence we thought it was necessary to screen her for porphyria, which was done. Porphobilinogen was done. It was found to be negative. It can be myasthenia gravis, but it will present slightly differently, and of course you could see the aggravation on exertion in that case. It could be hypokalemic paralysis is possible and worth considering, but her potassium was normal. Was it acute inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, what we call AIDP, or what is also labeled as Guillain-Barré, which we all see in non-diabetic as well as diabetic? Here again there was no sensory loss, which is quite typical of Guillain-Barré, but I must tell you that there are varieties of Guillain-Barré now I have described where there can be some sensory loss as well. But this did resemble a typical Guillain-Barré, you see, and of course because there were mainly motor involvement, and I think we can call it Guillain-Barré or acute inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. Very rare neuropathy described again in diabetic is insulin neuropathy, which is associated with the introduction of insulin treatment very paradoxically, and is resolved by stopping insulin therapy, which is a very strange thing. And again, this is not very well described or characterized neuropathy, and I don't remember to have seen any patient suffering from this. So, if you look at a patient of acute neuropathy like this in a diabetic, it's very important to note that the problem may not be related to diabetes. When a diabetic patient sees a physician or a diabetologist or a neurologist, one always first thinks that whatever is happening is related to diabetes, and it is prudent to think that way. However, it is also important to know that diabetics can suffer all varied diseases which a non-diabetic suffers. So, this is important not to lose sight of this very, very important fact, and in your diagnostic approach always keep this in mind. You see, for example, diabetics can have entrapment neuropathy, you see, which also again are aggravated in diabetic, but you see again the approach will be to really release that entrapment, or they can have many other neuropathy of different etiology. So it is very important to always keep in mind either the disease could be due to diabetes or could be aggravated because of diabetes, or could be entirely unrelated, as happened in this patient who was suffering from diabetes. Uncontrolled diabetes makes you think that it is really a neuropathy arising out of diabetes, but as I told you, the acute neuropathy with uncontrolled diabetes is extremely rare occurrence. In this patient, of course, these were the investigations. She was anemic, hemoglobin 8.8, and of course the white cell count was normal. You see, hypochromia was seen. The CSF sugar was 113. You see, proteins were not raised, 14 mg/%. And if we postulate Guillain-Barré, you see, one expects a little protein rise, but in the first week of the disease onset, it is possible to get normal proteins. So there are exceptions everywhere. That's what makes the internal medicine very exciting. And other investigation, the thyroid profile was normal, but serum iron was very low. So there was obviously iron deficiency, anemia, and of course some of these viruses, viral markers were negative like HCV, HIV viruses. There are some neuropathies associated with HIV disease or AIDS, and therefore one always screens. And porphyrin was done in the urine, which was found to be negative. See, so I think it's a very interesting patient in a diabetic having a acute neuropathy, which was mostly Guillain-Barré. EMG nerve conduction showed, you see, patchy changes involving mainly the motor nerves. No unequivocal evidence of demyelinating polyneuropathy was seen at that point of time. See, because this is very early on, you may not really get even the EMG nerve conduction changes as much as you would like to see, and which might be seen later on. And of course, 2D echo was normal. You see, the treatment was, of course, what is recommended. We were able to do all this in Just Look Hospital very efficiently. So we did her plasmapheresis, and we had to do about 5 cycles of plasmapheresis, and she made a near total recovery, not while in the hospital, but subsequently she made a near total recovery with plasmapheresis. So very interesting case of a acute neuropathy in a diabetic which is totally unrelated to diabetes. So I think with these two interesting case discussions, I would like to close here. Thank you very much for your participation.